unless anyone's waiting for anyone else that you know of. Sweet. Well, let's see. Is there anyone I haven't met before? I think maybe Colin's the only one I don't necessarily recognize or remember. So if I have met you before, I'm sorry.
Hi.
Have you been here before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well then I was spot on. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about yourself.
I'm Colin Wilson. I work for Maricopa Community Colleges.
Awesome.
And I've been doing, there we do a lot of PHP stuff, mainly with Drupal.
Cool.
And yeah, I saw the topic come up and it was of interest because I recently used Symfony to recode this like legacy PHP project. It's like vanilla PHP, so I wanted to replace it with a framework.
Very cool. Well, welcome
I'm excited
tonight.
for the topic. Thank you.
So, Arizona PHP is sponsored by Pagely. That's whose Zoom that we are using. When we used to meet in person, they also hosted us in their co-working location too. So we're always grateful for them. We're on Slack. Gordon, is this still true? Is it broken?
I am not sure. Let me take a look.
So we have a PHP channel in the AZ Devs Slack workspace. Usually you can go to azdevs.org to register for that. I guess last month it wasn't working.
It is still broken.
Ah, darn. Okay, but you know how to get people in? Is that?
Yes.
I think I can too.
Yeah, if anyone wants an invite, let me know and I will get that done. Just message me through Zoom here.
And so normally we do some announcements, some trivia before our presentation. PHP 8 came out before the end of the year, and we already have some cool RFCs lined up for version 8.1, including an enums RFC, which looks pretty cool. Unpacking string keyed arrays. That one I don't know. I haven't actually read that one. Does anyone know?
Yeah, instead of just being able to unpack like just regular numeric indexed arrays, now you can actually unpack string arrays. So you can actually use that in combination with PHP 8's named parameters.
Ah, interesting.
So, like unpack a bunch of, theoretically, if you want to do crazy stuff like that. But otherwise, it's an interesting way of merging arrays, I guess, if you want to.
Is that kind of like exploding out props in React?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, I guess the last one listed that I just did a quick search before the meeting was restricting globals modification. So there's some bits, I didn't really look at the whole thing, but it's mainly limiting changes or additions into the globals variable.
Making globals less globally.
Yes.
I'm guessing probably some security issues came up.
Yeah. What is no longer supported are rights to globals taken as a whole. All the following will generate a compile error. Like if you try to overwrite globals, it'll barf.
That's probably good.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about the enums one. The proposal looks pretty good. They've had some in the past. This one's definitely looking pretty decent. So, all right. Tonight, Peter will be presenting to us about end-to-end testing in Symfony and using PHPUnit. Guess he ran out of room there.
To keep it readable.
Before we do that, you're going to have a trivia question, I think. Where'd it go? There it goes. Out of order slides. There we go. All right. So speaking of PHP 8, which 4 of the following are not features added in PHP 8? So maybe you can, I don't know how we're going to answer. Answering this is hard without just saying it. Maybe you could chat it, or maybe you can just say it if you know the answer. I made it a little tricky on purpose.
I got one, I think. Pretty sure.
All right. Which one should we cross off?
Read-only properties.
That's correct. That is not a feature of PHP 8, though. It should have been.
Right. I got another one, but I'll let somebody else take a shot.
Who else wants to knock one off the list?
Well, enum type.
Enum type, yep, because that's, one we just said was in for 8.1.
I was going to take a stab in the dark with throw in expression.
Throw in expression. So that actually is a feature in PHP 8. So you can do like something equals blah, or throw exception.
Oh, nice.
What about arrayable interface?
Arrayable interface is not in PHP 8.0. Good call. Who said that? Who said that one?
Nice.
Nice. There's one more in there.
Is it one of the str methods?
Maybe. Yeah, so.
I feel like one of those is definitely in there. I'm not sure about both of them.
Well, those are both in there.
Okay.
Chris is actually onto something. This is my trick part of the question.
Is it stir starts with instead of begins with?
Yep.
Is it a misspelling? Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice. Nicely done. All right. Yep. So read-only properties, enum type, arrayable interface, str begins with. Those are not in PHP 8. It's str starts with.
I'll have to add that alias in 8.1.
All right. Well, does anyone else have anything they wanted to share before we give the presentation over to Peter? All right. Well, in that case, it's all yours.
All right. Let me share my screen here. Where? If I can get to the right. There we go. Technical difficulties. There we go. I had to make sure I was sharing the right Firefox window. All right, so I'm probably not going to be able to see everybody, but my name is Peter Adams. I run my own software development consulting company. We do pretty much entirely PHP. I've really started specializing more in Symfony in the last 3-4 years, and I've really struggled over the last decade in finding a good way of how to get like good unit testing put together. So what I started with here is just kind of my approach. This was my attempt to teach myself some things and figure a few things out. And it went okay. For me, end-to-end testing, my goal was to really test all of my code, everything that happened from the time I fired a request in until it got saved to the database or through an exception or whatever was going to happen. So I was really focusing on that. I know that in general, end-to-end testing, or at least now I know, end-to-end testing is really looking at it from also the UI perspective. And I'll touch on that a little bit here. So first off, PHPUnit, what is it? It's basically a program-oriented testing framework. There's not much to it. You can write code to test your code. That's really what it's for. It's an open source library. Sebastian Bergman. It's in version 8.5 now. I'm running 8.3 in my stack that I'm using here. But it's if you haven't looked at it, look at it. It's very extensible. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but if you can find some good examples to go from, it's a good place to start. So my setup, these are basically the 4 core pieces of my my build pipeline. So I use Code Sniffer to make sure everything's consistent. I use the Symfony CLI for a few different commands, validation, things like that. Started adding in PHP static analysis, PHP stan, in the last year and a half or so, to kind of help me with my bug hunting and stabilizing things. And then of course, PHPUnit. So a couple of caveats. My setup is very heavily tooled towards Symfony. That's the bulk of the projects that I'm working on. I have a Laravel project with one client, but everything I do is largely geared towards Symfony. I will touch a little bit on some comparable things that I found in Laravel that are kind of analogous to some of the things that I'm doing. So I'll try to cover that, but in some cases I found that at least built into Laravel, I didn't find anything similar. And so the second caveat I kind of touched on already, end-to-end in this context, we're really only covering end-to-end with the PHP code. So once that request comes into the server, hits the PHP, hits the controller, and goes through handling any events and that kind of stuff. So this is essentially my build pipeline right here. I'm doing all of this I use CodeShip for all of my continuous integration. So it runs my build processes, and ultimately on my develop branch, it will automatically deploy using Ansible to my staging servers. To just kind of go over what's happening here, this happens after the application has been cloned down. We've run Composer install, and we're just kind of running through everything. I've already set up and installed the Symfony CLI, which is why you see the Symfony console. Symfony console basically puts a wrapper around the built-in Symfony bin console, and allows you to run the bin console commands. But if you're using like Docker to handle your local environment, it will actually automatically know where your MySQL environment is in the Docker container versus you having to set up environment variables on your local system to be able to get to it. So the Symfony console wrapper is really nice for that from that perspective. But all I'm really doing is I'm just making sure everything that I have is syntactically correct. I've had a couple of instances where I get in a really quick, I'm trying to fix something fast because it's broken actively, and I'll make a stupid typo that I very frequently write end if when I'm ending a for statement in my Twig template. So this kind of helps me catch that kind of stuff before it gets out onto a server somewhere. So it lints my container. So that's all of my services. Make sure that by linting the container, it's actually making sure that all my dependency injection is set up right. And then it's doing it in both prod and staging environments, so that what I have that's running in test, I may have that bound up right, but because there are some prod or staging specific configurations, I want to check and make sure that the containers and all the dependency injection is configured right for those specific environments. So that's why you see those first two lines where I lint the container for those environments specifically. The third command is checking all of the configuration files, because as Gordon will attest, YAML can be very fickle about indentation and things. So making sure everything's lined up, making sure the config files are all syntactically correct is kind of the next piece. I do the same thing again for prod and staging, because prod and staging files get included based on the environment. So I need to make sure that those are set up correctly, explicitly. And then the last thing is it checks and validates all of those templates. So it makes sure that I didn't have a for loop where I started and used an end if twig tag. I've been known to do it. My hands get ahead of my brain. So that all of those commands just check syntax. That's all they do. Getting down into the bottom three, these are more for partially my own sanity, but partially because I don't like having a bunch of vulnerable packages. And so I try to keep everything as up to date as humanly possible. So the next one is the Symfony security check. Symfony security check is actually a wrapper built over the what is now just a general PHP command that's available for, I think it's local security PHP checker or something like that. But it actually grew out of the Symfony CLI, and then he just moved out into a general PHP command line tool that checks for open vulnerabilities in any of your included dependencies. I have a PHP stan command that I actually defined in my composer file. So that's why you see composer PHP stan and not like vendor bin PHP stan or something like that. And that's just running static analysis. I think the highest I've managed to get it is to like level 3 at this point. So, but it's getting there. And I every once in a while I'll dedicate a day or two to just increasing that level. And then the last one is just checking code style. So it runs through, does a code sniff, make sure that everything's laid out the same way. That one was more important when I had other developers working with me, and I wanted to make sure that everything was staying consistent. In Laravel, the only one that I've found has something equivalent to some of this. I used at one time the artisan optimize command to do essentially what I'm doing with the lint container. It's not exactly the same, but by running the PHP, by running PHP artisan optimize, it will actually essentially handle all of your containers and everything else. So it kind of has at least the same net effect. But I haven't found anything that is native, at least to the framework, that allows you to lint the blade templates that you're using or the configuration files. Since they're all PHP, if you use the optimize command, I think that'll probably take care of it. But it's generally good to check all that stuff anyway. So
I wouldn't recommend using optimize in your tests, but you're right, it would kind of sort of give you some linting, but it's not meant for that. And it's got other side effects that would come with it.
Okay. Good to know.
Also, optimize has been deprecated.
Oh, has it? So, all right. Yeah, that tells you how much I'm really digging into it. I don't think I have it in anything right now, but in the past, that's what I have used. So I don't know if there's additional third-party packages out there that do kind of some of these same things. I suspect that there probably are, but I have not looked into any of those just yet. So, and then the last part of the build pipeline, this is where we kind of get into really doing the tests. I drop all my schema, everything that I'm doing in test, I actually link to a SQLite database. So I'm not connecting up to MySQL or anything. And my goal really is to just make sure that the functions work. So dropping the schema, recreating it. I don't run through the migrations and stuff like that. My goal is to make sure that everything works, assuming we get it everything mapped correctly. So drop the schema, create it, load my fixture data, and run my PHPUnit commands. That's it. This tends to run fairly quickly, at least at the moment. I'm running about, on the project I'm going to show you, I think I'm running about 600 assertions and 80 or 90 tests, if I remember right. And so it runs through that particular project, builds, and starts deploying after about 6 minutes total. So let's look at some code. Let's see. Oops. Share. So this is kind of the core of everything. I am still desperately trying to figure out how env seems to work some of the time, and sometimes I have to use server, but it hasn't been as big a deal in my build environments. It picks up the environment variables that I set up there without any issues. So this has become less of a big, less important to me, but it is kind of the core spot. Because I'm trying not to hard code secret keys and stuff like that. I do make use of the new secrets feature quite a bit in projects now, where you can actually, it encrypts the actual values and you just don't commit your private keys. And that's kind of helped a little bit. It does add some overhead when you're doing, when you're working with it, but there are ways once you get it into an environment to actually drop those down into local environment files. I have in my case a couple of different extensions of kind of the core classes of the web test case, where I'm going and I'm actually creating a client, and in this case it's a Symfony HTTP client equivalent, and assigning it so that I can use that client to make all of my requests within it. And then extending from this, there's an authenticated option. So if I need to be able to log in, I just say, hey, here's the email of the one, and here are the roles that I want this person to have. And I can run through that and get everything and actually set up the full firewall context for somebody to be logged in. So I can go and hit an authenticated route. In APIs, I've actually used something similar to this, where I actually just created sent the authorization header with a simple API token over to it to be able to do the same thing, so that I could actually hit an authorized API endpoint. And then this is the first real test. So the way that I have mine kind of split up is I've got form tests, which test the actual submissions of different forms just to make sure that the data actually goes, saves, and ends up with the expected values that I want. The functional tests, I kind of consider them more smoke tests. And it's literally just in at least this one, it's just going and hitting a bunch of URLs and making sure we get a 200 status code back. So it loops through and hits all of these different URLs and then all of these API URLs and make sure that we got a successful response. And on the data URLs, it actually goes, because I kind of have a standard response that I send back with decoded content for the JSON. And so I actually verify bare minimum of the JSON. So I check the data URLs and the basic ones just to make sure that they work. Don't throw a 500 and that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that they're truly functional, but it at least does a smoke test to make sure that, you know, some change that I made, dependency injection error, whatever, didn't actually break a page so that when you go to it, you see a 500 error. And that's what a lot of these tests are. So there's one for an active user. There's specific behaviors that I would expect for a user that has a canceled account. There's another one who had for a user that has an expired trial account. And I just went and I split each of those into a separate test and just said, okay, these are all the URLs and this is the expectation that I have when I go to that URL. So for the most part, a lot of these, it should redirect them out for this particular user. In this case, there's logic in place that says if they have an expired free trial, we want them to go and put in their payment information. So just about any page that they go to, with the exception of settings, it should redirect them to the billing page. So that's why we're looking in this case for a 302. And then in these ones, we're looking for it needs to be successful because that's where it should be redirecting them to. Suspended trial. They're just these first 5 are really just variations on the type of user that I want to check. So if you have, you know, a set number of users, a good approach for me was to break everything out for a specific type of user into an individual test to do just the smoke tests. I'm taking the same approach with a client project right now, where I'm wanting to check specifically, does this user type, do they have access to this? Do they see this specific information? And so splitting those out allows me to just very quickly check that user isn't broken for some reason. And then this last one is actually more a true, what I would consider an end-to-end test. So in this one, we're setting everything up. We need to get our actual repositories. So in this case, I'm getting users, user tokens, and then I create an instance of Faker. This is actually getting and interacting with data that is in the SQLite database. So when I do my load fixtures, I'm actually loading this data.db right here. Whoops. And using the data in there to run through these tests. So I don't have to worry about loading it up to a MySQL environment or anything like that. I just fire this off and run through my tests. We need to make sure that everything's successful here. Once we've gotten to that form, we need to make sure we submit it. So let's see. Collapse these down. So this is, whoops, this is the next test right here. So first we check that and make sure that the sign up form got rendered. And then we need to make sure that we were able to submit the sign up form. So we go and we get it, and this is a public URL, so we don't want to, we don't need to authenticate. We build our response, make sure we got a response and that it was successful. And then this is where we kind of start moving into the actual pieces. So we get a crawler when we do the request, and this crawler is, it's similar to, if you're familiar with Cypress, where it can interact with the DOM and you can go and select out certain buttons and elements and stuff like that. It has kind of its own syntax, works fairly similar to XPath, and you can actually do XPath queries with it. But you can even just tell it, hey, go give me this button that has this text in it. And so it goes into actually submitting the form here. And this is where I'm just saying, this is the data that I'm going to submit. So I give it a name, I give it an email, password, I give it an activation code if I'm going to send that. And then this is what I was talking about, where you can say, go and give me find the button, get the button that says start free trial. And then it goes, that gives you the button. And then having that button allows you to submit the form, essentially clicking it and submitting all of the fields that match up with this. So these values have to match up with what the form fields that are being generated by your form objects inside of Symfony. But it allows you to say, okay, I have a form called registration form, and then I have a full name field, I have an email field, I have a password field, and I have an activation code field. Put the data in those and send it to the server like we just submitted a post. And that's what happens here. And then again, it's just going through and making sure that everything was successful. We get all of our data back. We get it, in this case, I'm sending back a redirect key. So I'm going to want to take that content and send it back down so that I can go through it and just check everything. So we follow the redirect, but this is going through, and because it submitted that form, just like an HTTP post, it's actually running any events that I fire within it. It runs, if I dispatch any queues to the messenger component, it'll execute those. I have messenger set up in test to operate synchronously, so it'll just run through and do everything on those specific handlers. Any Symfony events, database flushes, changes, anything like that actually happens and gets committed and sent into the SQLite database. And so I can then go and grab the data out of it and verify that the user was created by going and grabbing it. And I just check it and say, go find a user that matches the data that we submitted, and just make sure that we have it, make sure all the values match, and we're all set. Because we're sending an activation token, that's one of the messages that gets dispatched. So we need to go and make sure that, hey, did this user get an activation token created for them? So we verify that that happened. And then once we get that token, I can pass that in and actually check to see if when we go to that token's URL, if that user gets activated. So we can, what I've done here is literally tested from the time somebody submits the form all the way through until they activate their account. I've tested every step along the way to make sure that that's all working. Any questions so far? Nope.
Gordon had a comment in the chat. He said, nice use of data providers.
Oh, thank you.
Is this crawler stuff, is that just part of the Symfony core testing, or is that like a separate library?
That is part of the Symfony test pack.
Right on.
The crawler, I'm still figuring out everything about it. The client initially I was thinking was literally Symfony's HTTP client. It is, and I think it is to a certain extent. It has a lot of the same syntax in terms of implementing it. So if you're familiar with the Symfony HTTP client, it's actually really easy to set up this approach to send a request in a unit test to be able to check everything. So that's digging into the Symfony HTTP component was really what actually got me over the hump in learning how to do this particular type of test. So functional tests, that's kind of the core piece there. The form tests are a little bit more basic, where I deal with, I have my repositories, I check everything, I submit data, but they're not dynamic forms. So it's very much, I'm just adding this one object, and it's very uniform. It's very static. One of the ones that I can't test through this method, and this is kind of one of the downsides of it, is a form that has dynamic fields where your maybe one field is submitted based on some action a user took inside of the UI. It ends up changing, the JavaScript will change that field to required. And it's hard to test that particular piece if I'm not changing the actual form on the Symfony side. So in that respect, I think there's definitely some room for improvement. And I think Cypress is probably a better option if you're really wanting to test the UI element and the clickability and how things are behaving. I think something like Cypress is probably a better option. But you can at least get your very basic forms submitted and tested by submitting the different data and just using Faker. And then the last set, I have a couple of integration tests. So this particular project is using Stripe, and I want to make sure that, you know, when a payment fails, something happens, an email gets triggered, and it's not sending more than one email and that kind of stuff. So in this case, I'm actually through here, I actually directly integrate with Stripe's test API. I'm trying to find a way to mock up something around that so that I'm not actually sending a signal. But I haven't made it quite that far in my setup, because I know I don't want to do that long term. And then this is just, again, a more basic unit test here that I have kind of broken out. And this one just checks to make sure that I have the amounts matching what I think they should when I run a calculation. This one's probably more traditional unit test where it's just bare bones. Did this method return the amount that I want? Great, we're done, we're moving on. So those are kind of the four groups that I tend to put my tests into. The form tests tend to be for simplistic forms. The functional tests, I tend to do just smoke tests to make sure the URLs all work. I'll probably do a little bit more in there, similar to the user registration test. Integration is kind of checking where I have some points that I really don't want to fail. And then unit test is just kind of checking some calculations and that I don't screw something up.
Are you using floats for money?
So I am
the same discussion internally.
Symfony actually uses strings.
Okay.
I have a tendency, because I want it to be a number. I have a tendency to cast it over to a float.
There's a library called PHP Money that more or less implements Martin Fowler's money principles. It's a
PHP
really
Money?
nice library.
I'm making a note of that one. So I've been using, on the front end, I've been using Finance.js and I think it's Numeral.js. I'll double check on those, but I've been using, I've got a library that I'm using in here. Finance is, I know, one, and I'm pretty sure the other one is Numeral.js to do like number formatting and stuff like that.
Okay. I dropped a link to the GitHub library for it.
Perfect. Thank you. Then let me get back to the presentation here. It's only a couple more slides. So what it does well, I found that it handles smoke tests really well. I found that it tests static forms really well. Tests commands. So if you're using if you create a console command that you need to behave a certain way, tests those really well. And I've used it to test some API endpoints pretty extensively. So those are that's what I think it does well. But like I said, it's really limited on what you can do on the front end and test things there. And so this particular setup, I think if I were to do it again, I probably would have started going down the Cypress road a little bit more closely. This works really well from testing like my PHP code. I'm still working on my front end testability, but I've gotten a little bit better on writing more easily testable backend code. So starting there, and then it won't verify JavaScript actions. So if you click a button to add a series of additional fields to a form, it's not going to check that. You have to, it's only going to test, what data gets submitted and what happens. So anything that says, okay, this field's required now. So if you submit it without that, and it wasn't required on the Symfony side, but it became required on the client side, it could still pass the test. And I'm not thrilled with that. So I think that these are really the two big limitations I found with this particular approach. But good tests of the full stack of what actually happens when a request comes in. So any questions? If you need to get a hold of me, shoot me an email. This, I think, goes to my LinkedIn, if I remember right, website. And I will post this link to the slide deck in the meetup afterward. But I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Do you do any mocking? I know you were just talking about like you didn't want to hit the Stripe API or whatever you were saying, and like that's a great candidate for just like mocking, especially if you're using their libraries.
I have, but not on this project. I did some mocking inside of one of my other projects, and I'd have to go and dig it up. It's been a little while since I messed with that particular interface.
Sure. Does Symfony have any built-in mechanisms for mocking, or do they just encourage you to use PHPUnit's built-in mocking stuff?
They generally tell you to use the mocking capabilities of PHPUnit.
Cool.
Any other questions?
I saw you were using Faker in there. How were you making use of that?
So for the most part, just to generate my form data. That's really it.
Okay, yeah.
So I generate the form data and then submit that, but I have that form data is actually assigned as a property of the class so that I can use it in those additional ones to kind of check everything once it goes into the database and make sure it all matches.
Nice.
Have you written any bugs into your test yet?
Not yet.
Found a good way of reproducing an issue is to write the test that causes said issue and then go fix the issue and check your test passes.
Okay, yeah.
Test-driven development.
Yep, that's what I'm aiming for. I am not there yet. I am working on it.
It's so nice when it works out.
Yeah.
I'm a big supporter of it, but even then I myself usually write my code first.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So when I was working with a developer that I had, a junior developer under me, one of the things that I did to kind of help him was I actually went and I wrote the unit test and I said, make this test pass. I don't know how effective that was. I attempted it. Obviously, he's not still working for me, so I don't know.
Does that mean you scared him away?
I think that's probably part of it.
That's an interesting approach, though.
It's worked well. It's helped me catch a few things before it like made it out into production. Occasionally, it's really annoying because I actually use Git hooks on my local system, and it runs my full PHPUnit suite before on pre-push. So it forces the unit test to pass, but if I'm like in a rush and I want to get the hell out of there or stop for the day, or I have something going on, I have to be somewhere, and I'm sitting there trying to push my code up and it starts the unit test, I'm like, ah, crap, and then it fails, I'll just kind of start swearing. But in that case, the nice thing is you can use -- no verify to get around that, and it'll push it up, and it throws the error inside of my CI build. But at that point, I'm usually less concerned about it. It's just I want to make sure that the code isn't sitting on my laptop that could, at any point, could blow up. It could get lost. It could get damaged. Ride a motorcycle. It could get hit in an accident. I mean, I don't want to have something that isn't backed up. So I always make sure to try and push and get that stuff put up into my repository. All right. Well, thanks everybody. There's no other questions. I'll send it back over to, I guess, Gordon, since Jeremy walked away.
Right on. Yeah, thanks, Peter. Normally we'll still hang out for a little while here. Grab yourself an adult beverage or whatever.
I'll introduce next 2 months meetups. How about that?
That works.
We have 2 meetups lined up, guys. 2.
It's amazing. Thank you.
Almost like you're planning stuff.
All right. So next month, we're going to talk about building Slack apps in PHP. And I'll be presenting that topic. So I'll cover like the generics about how Slack application development works with their platform, and then also some PHP specific tools that can help with that. So that is posted up and you can RSVP for next month. In April, we have a presentation on Kubernetes and GitHub Actions. And Luther will be presenting that. And I just added the abstract for this presentation today. But he has some projects that he's going to walk through that demonstrate all of that. So that should be pretty cool as well. We've talked about Docker quite a few times in the past, but I don't think we've really covered much of Kubernetes. So that'll be a new twist on that, as well as seeing how the deployments can work with GitHub Actions. Should be kind of cool. That's the next 2 months. If you have ideas for after April, let us know. We'll get that lined up too. And Peter, I posted your slides on the meetup page already for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So, yeah. What else is going on?
The next step's going to be to learn Cypress.
I just want to thank Raymond because I forgot about that whole Money PHP library, and I literally just had a discussion this week or maybe last week about using integers instead of floats for money, and I think that if we can implement that package, that'd make a huge difference too.
Yeah, it's a great little package, and just with what I deal with at work, it's a must. Even though it wasn't ever there in begin with, there's a lot of test cases with actual edge cases dealing with floats that we had going on at least until we discover a new one.
Right.
So is it mostly to prevent issues with floats as a data type, or is it more doing different currencies? Or
I just read the description on the homepage, and it talks about the float issue and currencies as both like the things it attempts to solve.
Yeah, it's primarily about the whole float issue, and you can't have an exact number to represent it.
Yeah.
If anyone's tried to do much with money and floats, you might see some of your cents disappear or get extra ones.
or failed comparisons.
I'm sharing the page if you haven't seen it before, but this is their GitHub page for the money library. And someone also mentioned the Martin Fowler money pattern, for which this was kind of the idea that it's based on. You can find that on martinfowler.com. And it's basically just highlighting the problem with losing or gaining extra cents if you don't store things correctly. So I'll drop a link to this. Always good extra reading.
Now I kind of want to go back and look and see what my underlying data type that I'm messing around with on the on my objects are for the money fields. I know I'm using decimal in the database.
I recommend switching over to cents if you have the bandwidth to do it, and
Switch
then
over to what?
using cents, so you can store it as an int instead of a decimal.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. Now I'm trying to remember what I did. Hold on.
Yeah, I don't believe the decimal type has any floating point issues.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
But I think that's why they are using string inside of doctrine.
So for representing it or like storing it, that's fine. But as soon as you start to do like math on it, that's where the float versus int comes into issue.
Yeah.
As an issue. And on a similar vein, don't store and use and treat your zip codes like numbers. They're strings.
They can be alphanumeric.
Right.
It's got letters in it.
Just because a string is composed of only numbers doesn't make it an integer.
Yep.
You wouldn't increment a zip code. I mean, maybe, but it's not a typical operation.
I don't think you'd want to, but you could.
Right.
In the US.
Oh, Ubuntu 16.04 is reaching deprecation next month.
That's okay. I'm switching to Arch. Literally.
No, we're trying to get off a Zen 1 framework right now just so we can go to 2004. And luckily someone found a community library that supports up to at least 7 something for it. And while we also then later refactor all the Zen 1 components out of it.
Nice. That might actually be a big reason that people start switching over to PHP 7 something, because with 18, wasn't it 7.2 on 1804?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the so like you're saying, 1604 is the last 5.x LTS for Ubuntu. Cool.
There's been some. So I have a couple of clients that are using SendGrid, and two different frameworks. One on Laravel, and the other one, I thankfully am not involved in maintaining the project. He's got some internal people. I just have to occasionally help them. But it's a Zen Framework 1 product that is just a catastrophe waiting to happen. But they both use SendGrid, and the Laravel one saw it first, where SendGrid, they deprecated their username password SMTP sending method. So you had to start using the API key. And all of the information that's out there says just send the username API key, and then your API key is your password, is still out there, and that doesn't work anymore. So I didn't realize that we had SendGrid on the Laravel application. So that became a very frantic half a day, Friday afternoon, getting that fixed, because Laravel didn't have, there was something about it that it didn't, the way it handled mailers, it didn't have something native that worked. It's at least Laravel 7, which is what this one's running on, and it didn't have a mailer, so it was trying to still send it using SMTP, which didn't work. So I had to go and find and write, an actual API for it. The other one was Zend 1, and they got hit with the exact same thing, but I think it must have gone on for a week and a half before they even realized it was an issue, and wasn't sending mail. So they had a couple of their internal guys, and I looked at their stuff today because they still couldn't figure something out. And I looked at it, and they hard-coded the API key inside of the code. I'm like, oh, you guys, you're killing me. Like, what is wrong with you? I don't know. That was, you asked at the beginning of this, Jeremy, like, what's some weird stuff? I forgot about that one, but yeah, the SendGrid stuff that's loads of fun.
I've been doing a load of pull requests where people are try catching and just catch exception all the time instead of a specific exception. I'm trying to teach them good exception handling and stuff. That's been challenging.
I probably need to work on that. I won't show you what my try catches look like.
Or just that there's even more than just a normal exception, and there's 13 of them.
And then you can make your own when you need to.
Yep.
Yeah. I like using the built-in ones primarily.
I try to find a built-in one that makes sense, but there's like, if you're writing like in specific, like I've been writing a few like HTTP client libraries, and those are useful to kind of create your own exceptions for translating those as well. Pro tip, if you do translate an exception, make sure you forward any other exceptions as the previous exception and then exception, so that way you can still see what the underlying exception is. Yeah.
I've still have struggled to find reasons to use finally.
I've used it in a couple of things, but not recently that I could actually go and pull it up. But yeah, like twice.
I tried to use it the other day. I'm like, oh, this is a good use case for finally. And then I wrote it. I'm like, oh, wait, no, it's not.
Foiled again.
Yeah.
I discovered, so I've been using, thankfully I was already on my way to get off of them beforehand, but I was using Loggly, which is owned by SolarWinds, for log aggregation. And thankfully I was getting away from them already. But I discovered Sentry, which is about a quarter of the price. And
We were
it's
using
basically
Sentry
the
for a
same thing,
while.
and their stack inspection is amazing.
Is their libraries SDK still a giant piece of garbage though?
I don't think so.
No?
I
Okay,
got
maybe they.
to, they're up to 4.0 now. So I have 4.0.1 that I just put on a project that actually has the ability to filter exceptions out. So Symfony throws HTTP not found and access denied exceptions for, you know, somebody that goes to the site and they're not authenticated yet, and so it redirects them to the login page. So I have like 3,500 access denied exceptions, and I go and I look, I'm like, this is just somebody going to the site that hasn't logged in yet. What the hell? So I finally figured out how to filter those out, but you have to, they didn't get it until the 4.0 version, which just came out.
Might have to look at it again.
Sounds like they did a rewrite, Gordon.
I think they did.
Their library was really painful. If you had to do anything that wasn't strictly provided by their library, it was so painful to try and shoehorn any extra functionality into it.
I especially enjoyed
limited.
the improper handling of stack traces, so that anytime there was any memory pressure, you would just blow everything up and get no errors. That was really a plus, the memory leaking.
There, I will say that it probably is still a little limited. What I was able to use to catch and filter out the exceptions that I don't want to send up is they have you can connect in and use a before send handler that you basically just say, okay, use this service as before send, and it invokes that class, and then you can write your actual filter in there. And if you basically, you just do whatever checks you want, and then if those checks pass, you just return null, because you don't want to do that, or, you know, other way around. But if you return the event, it'll continue bubbling through. But if you return null, it basically stops the event from going over.
That's cool, like a little middleware.
I like it so far, at least. I think I'm like 2 months on it, a month maybe. Ask me again in 6 months, see if I still like it.
If anyone is interested, Josh and the rest of us have done quite a bit of changes to our testing framework at Pagely, and I can show off how disgustingly easy it is to make API tests now. Yeah,
sure. I say go for it.
All right. I think that's, yeah.
By API, do you mean like an external API, like where you got to call out to an external API?
No, our own internal APIs.
Okay.
Testing our own stuff.
It's kind of in the same vein as what Peter was doing.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. So we've created this Fluent interface that extends the base, test case from PHPUnit, and this cases method pretty much generates the data provider that ends up being used for the test itself. So starting out, we normally will have one of these test files for each endpoint and do all the different tests that we would normally do for the endpoint. So we generate a template first. So this is going to be like the defaults for each test going forward.
Kind of cool.
So we'll specify the URL, the method we're going to use, the default authentication type, and any like body parameters, query parameters, headers, et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll have run a case method, and each one of these is going to end up being an actual API test. So in this case, we're just going to test that we get a 401 if we try to authenticate as not authenticated, or essentially not sending an access token. And if we try to do something as a wrong account, we'll get a 403. This specific test is for our ability to specify a PHP version for our customers. So if they try and do something silly like request a weird PHP version, we expect a 422, which is a validation error. And we have this nice little way of returning both the response code and the response body. So we could just take that body, decode it, or we can just check to make sure an expected string is located in that body.
This is way better than my approach.
Well, it took a little bit to build this.
It's a couple of layers of abstraction.
It is, but it is so fun to use now. It's so nice to be able to write tests now.
And this hooks into the bootstrapping of the framework to make a simulated request. So if you need to mock out a component, you can pull out the DI injection container that would be used for that request and replace whatever component you want with your mocked version. So if you had a SendGrid in the mix, you can do that. And that also helps on the performance. So like if you're one of the services that your endpoint's going to call another service, and that service happens to be really slow because it's doing something complicated, you could mock that. Or if you don't want to mock that, you can do that too. So kind of have the flexibility to use as much mocking or not as you need to.
Yep. Like here, we're essentially making sure that a mocked service gets called with a specific method. Or actually, it's never called in this case. And we also added a little bit of magic for checking like a JSON path of within the body to make sure that it actually is a specific value or string or number or whatever. That's pretty much it.
Feel like I should have at least shown, the PHPUnit command running, that it actually like worked.
But then it wouldn't have, and we'd have all had to debug it together.
I don't know. It might.
You said it takes like 6 minutes. So.
Oh no! The unit testing itself is like 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Let's see.
So you said you're using PHP Stan. I use that on all library code that I write for sure. And then Psalm is another similar tool, I believe. Is anyone using that one?
I use both for different things.
What's the where do they intersect versus not intersect?
For me, I'm using Psalm on I think all of my libraries and one or two of my projects, and I'm using PHP Stan on Laravel things because there's a wrapper package called Laristan that adds a few additional Laravel specific things to it.
It sounds like a country name.
But really, I think they're both pretty good. I like PHP Stan's like YAML style configuration better than Psalm's XML one. XML bugs me, but it is what it is.
The thing I like about Stan is that if I'm just adding on a project, especially if I've already started it, I can start with a lower level and run it at like a level 2, and then just start incrementally changing things and increasing the level. I think it goes up to like 7 or something.
8, I think, is the max.
I think it's 8.
Yeah. You can do the same with Psalm, but it's more granular. It's not. I don't like. They do have the concept of levels. I believe it's been a little while since I've configured it, but it's got similar functionality. I don't know exactly how close it is, but yeah.
Yeah, if anyone has not used one of those tools, they take your PHP.comments very seriously.
Yes, they do. But it's so nice once you get a project on Max. We had our project.
It's kind of like getting all the stars on some kind of video game level.
The thing I like about it is it eliminates a lot of stuff that you have to check as a reviewer. It just automates that out of there for you.
Yeah, that's been the big thing for me with using PHP Stan is just forgetting to add a property, or I go through and when I'm refactoring, I remove a variable out of there, but I forget to do it somewhere in my code. Like all of that stuff gets caught. That's been the biggest advantage that I've gotten out of it, is just fixing all of my own stupidity.
No, it's very helpful on larger teams, or even smaller teams, when teams in general, just to have an established baseline. It cuts out some crud on when it comes to, well, it should be this way or that way. No, this says this, just go with it.
Yeah, it was a little interesting trying to figure out how to get it to work with Symfony early on. It required some special configuration setup, kind of like how Laravel does. And initially, like it didn't handle reflection very well. The latest version, I think 0.12.4 handles reflection quite a bit better, where it doesn't freak out as much if you're using like an attributes, or if you, like in Laravel, you have to make sure that you add all of your property definitions in your doc annotations up at the top, or PHP Stan will freak out on me.
Yeah, we were running on Max, then we did an upgrade to 7.4 and turned around and had to drop it down to 0.
Oh, jeez.
Just to move forward.
What did it start flagging?
Well, it's also with Laravel, and I forget what it started flagging now. So every time I'm trying to remind everyone, okay, run it on 1, start fixing one thing here and there so we can just keep progressing.
Well, my current company, when I came in, they didn't have any of that, and I remember I had to start low and fix like 2 or 3 or 4 different levels before I was mostly where I wanted to be. I think we're up to 7 now.
The first like 2 levels aren't bad. It's when you get to like, when you hit, I think I'm running 3 on that project that I was showing tonight. I think if I go to 4, I'm probably going to lose my mind. I don't know. Now that I've got one feature that I just finished, and I just need to go through full testing on it.
It
and
certainly
then I've
does
got
have
one
a
more that I want to write. And I think at that point, I think after I fully test this feature, I might actually go through and hit and up the level to 4 and see what happens.
Keep in mind, if you're at a solid place in your current level, you can always bump it up a level and generate a baseline. So then any existing errors at that level will be ignored. And then just as you write new code, it'll have to adhere to the new levels. So that way you can not have to bump up the level and fix 1,000 problems before you can be at green.
That's kind of cool. I didn't know you could do that. Is there? How do you do what do you do to set that up?
So with PHP Stan and Psalm, it's basically the same thing. Once you're get to one, and at one level, get to a point where everything's green, and then bump it up to the next level, and you'll run. And if you run it and you get 1,000 errors that you're not going to fix, you can run in PHP stand. I believe it's PHP stand -- generate baseline, and it'll generate a new file and add an option to your config to include that file as just this is acknowledged and ignored errors, and it'll know. And so if it sees that error again, it won't even report it to you, or you can configure it to either report it or just make it a warning instead. I just ignore them because there are usually a lot of them and they're just noise. And then as your code changes, it'll scan it and it'll see a new error that's not included in that baseline and report that new error that you'll then have to fix, but all your base stuff will stay the same.
Thank you for this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I believe PHP stand, I believe, is -- generate -baseline, and SOM is, I believe, -- set -baseline are the options for that. Very useful.
You're correct. -- generate -baseline for PHP stand.
Mm-hmm. In a similar way, you can add like ignore rules to the config manually. For me, I generally reserve those for errors I can't fix. Like, for example, errors caused by external libraries. Then you can add those manually to your ignore files and say, I know that package XYZ creates this error, so I'm just going to ignore it. But then the baseline is for what we just talked about.
Yeah, I've got several ignores that are like one of them is even in the Symfony kernel. It says it's calling some unknown class. It's not, like, it's supposed to be there. But there's a couple of weird random ones that it gets on Symfony that if you don't remove it, there's another one that's actually related to Stripe. It doesn't like anything to do with the Stripe objects. Because they're all of the API objects that come back from Stripe are,
Stripe objects.
Magic
I ran into that too recently. And
for the magic method stuff on PHP stand, you can just say that those classes are property backs. So then it'll let anything on it. So it's not full validation then that the property exists, but it's better than ignoring the error, because then you know these classes are safe to ignore. Just an option in the config.
That's cool.
But you can also write your own extensions that actually map through the stuff of whatever random libraries you're using, which is like what the Laravel and Symfony integrations do. It's just a lot of effort.
Yeah. Let's see what happens when I go to level 4.
Talk to you guys later.
See ya. Have a good night.
Bye.
Only 113 errors. It's not too bad.
Just shy of a gross.
Betcha that's actually only like realistically like 20 errors duplicated over and over again.
Yep. There's like in almost all of them, unreachable statement. Weird that it's a bunch of unreachable statement ones though.
I swear I've had some of those that didn't make sense, but it's been a while.
Maybe are they ternaries?
Some of them may have been ternaries.
Can't remember what else can cause that. I mean, besides literally having returns in front of other things, which you probably don't have.
One place where Stan gets me a lot is there will be a method that will either return either an instance of an object or false, and I accidentally annotate it as it's just going to return that object, and then I do an if else or something like that, and it's always going to be false, or
Or it could be false.
Right.
But you have to annotate it as that an instance of that object or false.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Stan will tell you.
There are like lazy properties where like you create it on the fly, but if you annotate the property as always being a certain type, then it will expect that you treat it that way everywhere. So if you check it as like if you're checking if it's null, it's like this can't ever be null, you idiot.
Do any of you use like the annotations to like annotate like nest like if you ever have to annotate an object, you do the where you actually tell it what the object looks like the shape of the object and stuff. So like sometimes you have to work with just like a plain old object or an array maybe. But you can then give it like special annotations that say this object or array has this specific shape, like these properties, and these properties contain these types of values. It's very powerful if you're forced to work with like these objects and arrays that are unstructured, but you know what they're going to look like anyway.
You pretty much have to do that with Laravel models.
That's one of the things that Laristan I think helps with, is it can actually it does some magic to infer those like model properties and stuff for you, which is cool.
Yeah, so that's an extension which is reading the metadata on it and feeding it into Stan.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't done the object annotations a lot, but I pasted something in chat, which I do like all the time now, where you say what the shape of the array is.
Stuff like that, yeah.
That's very .NET-esque. That looks like C#.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the way I tend to do it, is with whatever my object name is in the square brackets when I have an array of it.
Yeah, I do that one a lot. Object square brackets afterwards. Very helpful for later on in catching bugs when people write code.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what it is.
You can do one like that too, I know, with PHP Stan.
And PHP Storm picks up on these too, which is awesome.
Oh yeah, a lot of the editors will pick that up now.
Yeah, IntelliJ as well.
It's the underlying what do you call it, language servers now. Those things are interesting and crazy, and a cool paradigm that something I've wanted to dig deeper into.
Yeah, I mean, I use one of the language servers that's written in PHP, so you can actually understand the code pretty easily.
I'm gonna hop off here though. Thanks again, Peter.
About that time. Hey, Peter, thanks a lot again for tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for letting me present. Appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.
Yep. See you all next month.
See ya.
Bye.
Later, everyone.